Picture this. It's China, sometime around the 9th century. You're a Daoist alchemist. Your job, your actual paid, respected job, is to find the elixir of immortality, not metaphorically. Literally. Eternal life in a bowl, cooked up from minerals and time and a lot of patience. So you're mixing things: sulfur, charcoal, and a salty white mineral called saltpeter, because ancient chemistry was basically throw it in and see what happens. And on this particular day, something happens. The mixture doesn't grant you eternal life. It nearly ends yours. It flares. It hisses. It singes your eyebrows clean off. Congratulations. You didn't find immortality. You found gunpowder. That's it. That's the origin story nobody tells you. The deadliest technology humans have ever built didn't start in a war room. It started in a monk's workshop on a quest to cheat death, and instead built the thing that's caused more of it than almost anything else in history. So, how does that happen? How does a search for eternal life end up inventing the gun? Stick around. We're going to trace this from a lab accident in Tang Dynasty China all the way to the modern battlefield. And along the way, bust a few myths you've probably been told your whole life. Let's start with what this actually was. Not a weapon, not even close. The alchemists who stumbled onto this mixture weren't soldiers, and they weren't trying to hurt anyone. They were part of a very real, very serious pursuit called Waidan, external alchemy, the belief that if you combined the right elements in the right way, you could create a substance that stopped aging altogether. Saltpeter specifically was considered a promising ingredient. It was cool to the touch. It dissolved in water. It seemed almost magical. Mix it with sulfur and charcoal, and in the right proportions, you get something the Chinese would later name Huoyao, fire medicine, fire medicine. Think about that phrase for a second. They weren't naming a weapon. They were naming what they thought was a cure. The earliest written descriptions of this mixture from around the 9th century actually warn against it. Alchemical texts caution that combining these ingredients can cause fires, burn down buildings, injure the people handling it. This wasn't propaganda. This was a safety warning, written by people who'd clearly learned the hard way. But here's where the story turns. Once something explodes, somebody always asks the same question: can we use this on purpose? By the 10th century, Chinese military engineers had started weaponizing what the alchemists had discovered by accident. The first applications weren't guns. They weren't even close to guns. They were fire arrows, regular arrows wrapped with pouches of this fire medicine, lit before firing, so they'd ignite whatever they hit. Then came something stranger: the fire lance. Picture a spear with a tube attached near the tip, packed with gunpowder and sometimes shrapnel. Broken pottery, metal scraps. Light it, and it would spew flame and debris at whoever was unlucky enough to be standing in front of it. It wasn't accurate. It wasn't reliable. But it worked well enough to change how battles were fought, and this is where the first myth needs busting. You've probably heard that guns were invented in Europe. They weren't. By the time gunpowder weapons reached Europe, sometime in the 13th century, likely through trade routes stretching across the Mongol Empire, China had already been refining fire lances, early cannons, and gunpowder bombs for roughly 300 years. Europe didn't invent gunpowder. Europe inherited it, and then, in typical fashion, industrialized it. By the 14th century, the technology had evolved into the hand cannon, a metal tube, a wooden stock, a touch hole to ignite the charge inside, point it, light it, and hope for the best. These things were loud, slow, wildly inaccurate, and honestly kind of terrifying to operate. You were as likely to injure yourself as your target. But they did one thing no sword, spear, or bow could do. They let an untrained peasant kill an armored knight who'd spent his entire life training for combat. That's the moment everything shifts. For the first time in human history, lethal force stopped being about years of training and started being about access to a tool. A knight's decades of swordplay meant nothing against a farmer with a hand cannon and a lucky shot. Armor, horses, castles, the entire foundation of medieval warfare suddenly had an expiration date. From there, it's escalation, stage after stage. Hand cannons become matchlocks. Matchlocks become flintlocks. Flintlocks become the rifles and revolvers of the 19th century, refined through the Industrial Revolution into weapons that could fire faster, farther, and more reliably than anything before them. And here's the second myth worth busting. Guns weren't invented for war. And they definitely weren't invented for hunting or self-defense either, even though that's how most of their history gets told. The entire chain starts with a monk trying to dodge death itself. Every gun ever fired since traces back to that same accidental discovery, a mixture that was supposed to preserve life, and instead became the most efficient tool humans have ever built for ending it. Zoom out for a second and the irony gets even heavier. Historians estimate that firearms, directly and indirectly, have been connected to the deaths of tens of millions of people across the centuries since that first accidental flare-up. Empires rose and fell based on who had access to this technology first. Colonization, in large part, was a gunpowder story. Entire continents reshaped by which side had the fire medicine and which side didn't, all from a search for the opposite, all from someone trying to make sure nobody had to die. So the next time you hear the phrase guns were invented to kill, you can push back on that. That's not actually true. Guns were invented by accident, by someone trying to prevent death entirely, in a workshop with no soldiers, no war, and no weapons in sight. What came after the fire lances, the cannons, the centuries of escalation, that's what humans did with the discovery, not what the discovery was for. There's something strangely human in that gap. The same impulse that makes us fear our own mortality, the drive to search, to experiment, to push past the limits of what we understand, is the exact same impulse that keeps handing us tools we don't fully know how to put down. An alchemist searching for forever ended up building something that takes forever away, and somewhere, 9 centuries later, that irony is still burning. If you want the next accidental invention story, the one where an entire industry gets built out of a mistake, let me know in the comments. There are more of these than you'd think. Don't forget to like and subscribe, so you will the first to know whenever I drop a new video.